Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Kobe Wiafe, and I currently serve as an administrative fellow at Memorial Hermann Health System. As many of you know, we're right in the middle of summer, which also means we're right in the heart of administrative fellowship application season. So many programs across the country have opened their applications, and students are actively researching programs, preparing their application materials, and getting ready for interviews in the coming months. So whether you're planning to apply to this application cycle, or you're in the middle of preparing your application, or you're just starting to think about what applications might look like for next year, we hope tonight's discussion provides some valuable insight and helps you feel more prepared for your own fellowship journey. I'm sure all of us on this panel remember being in your position not too long ago, from fellow researching programs to trying to figure out which ones are the right fit to preparing our materials. And so that's why I'm excited to be here tonight. We hope that by sharing our experiences and the things we've learned, the things we've encountered, we can help make your own fellowship journey just a little bit easier. So this evening will provide some insight into the full administrative fellowship experience, from researching and selecting programs to applying and interviewing to onboarding and then beginning your fellowship year. We'll also explore a little bit of what the role of an administrative fellow looks like from the day-to-day perspective, the kinds of projects fellows get involved with, and kind of these experiences that help us to prepare for futures in healthcare leadership. So we have an outstanding group of panelists tonight, and I'm excited for all of you guys to hear from them. So to start off, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves by sharing your name, the school you attended, the organization where you're currently completing your fellowship, and then where you currently are kind of in your career journey. So we can start with Kajatu and then Molly and Ray, and then I'll finish off.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. My name is Kejitu Diallo. I graduated from Ohio State University with my MHA degree in May of 2025, and currently I am an administrative fellow at Houston Methodist. I would say in my fellowship timeline, definitely wrapping up my core rotations and about to spend a couple of months taking some time with some elective rotations, and we'll be transitioning hopefully from there into a full-time position.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Amali. I just recently graduated from the Texas A&M University program with the Master of Health Administration. So I've just started my fellowship at UTMB. I'm about a week and a half in, so I'm pretty new to the organization. Still getting acquainted, but yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm happy to be a resource, and I hope I can make the fellowship process seem less intimidating.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Ray Molinetto. I am a fellow or admin resident with HCA Houston Healthcare. I went to the University of Virginia for undergrad and Cornell for my MHA, completed the fellowship this past month and started as associate administrator, again, with HCA Houston Healthcare here in the division and going forward in the hospital operations track. It's nice to meet everyone.
Awesome. And like I mentioned, my name is Kobe Wiafe. I did my MHA at the University of Oklahoma. I finished that program in May of 2025. Like I mentioned previously, I'm a fellow at Memorial Hermann Health System here in Houston. I am essentially wrapping up my fellowship. And so within the next week or so, I'll be transitioning to my post-fellowship role as the manager of operations at our Texas Medical Center campus. So it's been a great experience so far, and I'm looking forward to what's ahead. So thank you for those introductions. And with that, we can jump right into our discussion. This first question will be for all of you guys. But looking back to when you graduated or as you prepare to begin your fellowship this summer, what role did you believe an administrative fellowship would play in shaping your career in healthcare administration?
I would definitely say the role that I believed a fellowship would play in shaping my career in healthcare administration would definitely help me figure out what exactly are my kind of goals or what exactly is my passion, aligning that with the specific roles that may be best a fit. So I know coming out of graduate school, you learn about a lot of different areas and opportunities, such as strategy, operations, and things along those lines. So one of the things that really drew me into a fellowship was understanding what exactly does the day-to-day role look like for each of these positions or people in these different areas? What are additional opportunities that are available for me? What are some hands-on projects that are available that can get that hands-on exposure and really understand if it aligns with what my goals are for the future? So I definitely would say during the fellowship journey so far, it has definitely helped me work on completing that goal that I had getting started.
Definitely agree with a lot that was just said. Also, recognizing that a lot of us go straight from undergrad to our MHA program. So recognizing we have a lot left to learn beyond the didactic portion of healthcare and what it means to understand different submodalities within healthcare, whether it be hospital operations to the insurance side. So using a fellowship to really narrow down what you want to do specifically within a healthcare system, because there's so many arms, I think is definitely helpful in narrowing down your passion.
Yeah, to add on to that, I'd like to say that I believe that the fellowship would play a role in helping me determine not only what department I would like to work in by giving me exposure to projects or rotations, but also um, my leadership style, becoming familiarized with myself and what type of work or department I would fit best in, but then also what mentors or leaders I'd like to follow after in their footsteps. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like a common theme I'm hearing is this idea of being able to explore just all that healthcare admin has to offer. And I think for myself, I kind of think of a fellowship almost like a hack, if you will, because I feel like as I was going through the fellowship, I was still a student, but I was also kind of getting some more responsibility to be able to dive into what is operations, what is strategy. And so it's a nice kind of balance between learning all that healthcare admin has to entail, but also getting that kind of hands-on experience. So that's super helpful. For Amali, how did you approach researching fellowship opportunities? Were there like particular resources or tools that you used, or what did you find helpful in the, I guess, the research process?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I spent a lot of time talking to former or current fellows. I think those conversations were so valuable because they gave me insight into the organization that I couldn't gather from a website or a post on LinkedIn. So using my connections from ACHE, but then also just using tangible resources like the fellowship directory, even sitting on webinars like this one or any organizational-based webinar where I could, get a hold of someone or build a contact to further hunt down information, if you will. So I think try to focus less on prestige and more on finding a place where I could see myself growing as a leader and seeing leaders who wanted to invest in fellows, and that went on through a process of just talking to people, building those organizational connections, if you will. But aside from that, like on the more tangible side of researching and becoming familiarized with my expectations for fellowship opportunities, I did create a spreadsheet. I mean, I think we were all pretty acquainted with that, to keep track of application deadlines, rotations, location, etc.
Yeah, and just to follow up, I feel like a lot of times we are told as applicants to reach out to the current fellows at the organization we're interested in and kind of schedule those coffee chats. So, what were some of the questions that you would ask whenever you'd reach out to former fellows or people at the organizations you were interested in?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up question. I think my main focuses were, how have leaders at your organization invested in you? What major projects have you worked on that drew you to your passion? And then also just, very like typical based, is it a rotation based, project based? To what extent are you allowed to lead projects, or how much of your own initiative can you take when searching for opportunities for yourself? Can you start something from scratch, or is this something that's more like of a handheld program, if you will? So I think those are important questions to me.
Yeah, that's super great insight. Thank you for that. The
Mhm.
next question for Ray, how did you determine whether a fellowship was truly the right fit for your personal career goals?
Absolutely. I would say the internship I had the summer between my first and second year played a key role. I knew I was interested in hospital operations within a fellowship, but I explored ambulatory side at the Cleveland Clinic. So that confirmed, had a great experience, but that confirmed I wanted to be in the hospital, kind of department to department, like in the weeds of things. And I think, having different experiences allows you to see that. So when I thought about what are next steps, narrowed down, kind of like was previously answered. You got to have your kind of key requirements of what you're looking for in a hospital and health system, and your kind of tangibles for what you're looking at in your next step for career growth.
Yeah, thank you for that. Moving on, kind of to looking back, is there anything that you think you would have done differently as you were preparing for the beast that is the fellowship application process?
Yes, the fellowship application process can definitely get very complex and very time consuming, but I definitely am a firm believer that things do happen for a reason. So I kind of would say, going back, a piece of advice that I would give someone going into this process is really to take some time and look deep into the organizations that you're applying to. I remember firsthand when I was starting to applying to different fellowships, I had about 25 plus organizations. And I remember a fellowship coach that my graduate program gave us was like, okay, where do you actually see yourself being? And also being there long term. So really making sure that you make that a priority, narrowing that list down if possible, if needed, and making sure that it's places that really aligns with you. And another thing that I would definitely say as well is really ensuring that you have that strong why for wanting to be at that organization, because as you go through the fellowship, things definitely will get busy and will not be easy. So really once you have that strong why and understanding why you're at that organization and what your end goal is as well, it really helps continue to push you.
Yeah, that's great. And I think I would add for those of you who might not be applying for next year, but are kind of a little early in the process, I would say it's also never too early to start your application, whether that means researching organizations or trying to figure out what your personal statement could look like. These are all, I guess, components of the fellowship application process that are frankly pretty vital. And so I remember going through the process, I was kind of in the midst of my summer internship too. So it's a lot to kind of try to juggle the internship and then trying to figure out the deadlines and application things. So if you can start sooner rather than later, I think that's also another way you can try to get ahead of the curve. For Amali, whenever you were evaluating different fellowship opportunities, what factors ultimately became the most important for you in helping you to make your decision?
Thank you for the question. I think for me, executive engagement was big. So I wanted to know whether fellows actually had access to senior leaders, or if they were working mostly independently. So that was pretty important to me in my evaluation. But then also, I wanted to know the type of projects that the fellows had completed, whether they had opportunities across different service lines, what the mentorship structure and cadence of meeting looked like. So that was important. And then also what ended up happening with their careers post fellowship and how the fellowship led them to there. So ultimately, it was really me asking myself whether I could picture myself growing with the organization after that following year.
And for your fellowship program specifically, do you guys have any built-in, I guess, mentorship or executive relationships that are part of your fellowship experience?
We do have our assigned preceptor who we meet with on a regular cadence. And then aside from that, we do have introductory meetings with all the executives in the C-suite. And then from there, we get to, decide who we will, I guess, take after.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that.
Mhm.
For Ray and Kojitu, from y'all's perspective, what do you think fellowship programs tend to look for the most in candidates during the application process?
I would say broadly, and I've heard this from multiple different health systems, humble, hungry, and smart. And that really boils down to like there's nothing too small and nothing too big that you wouldn't want to tackle or learn from. And that applies to any health system or fellowship that you're going to be applying to. And I think that shows with your willingness to just raise your hand, say yes to things that maybe necessarily you're not the most interested in, but it's going to be a learning experience regardless. I think some of the most invaluable lessons I've learned through my fellowship in this past year were, things that I necessarily wasn't exposed to in my MHA program operationally, but just through, diving into the deep end and helping out with whether it be plant operations or jumping into the laboratory and understanding the, workflow of things and how it affects the patient at the end of the day. It allows you to really learn your craft and then be able to provide value in the future.
Yes, and definitely 100% agree with Ray. I feel like the only thing that I would add that I would say that fellowship programs typically are looking for when they're kind of seeking out candidates and going through the interview process is really just sharing that strong why and having that passion, especially as you kind of go through answers, through writing your personal statements and things along those lines. And also just really, as Ray shared, really being eager to wanting to learn, because it's very important to understand that these fellowship opportunities, they definitely understand that you do not know everything, but it's a great opportunity to learn and have that exposure. So really showcasing that and sharing how the organization will help you meet those goals and be able to kind of help you continue to learn and grow as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's super valuable. And I think going back to kind of figuring out your why, I think a big part of it as well. Is I remember going through the process, a lot of people would tell me as you're, filling out your personal statements or these applications, make sure you're specific as to why you want to do fellowship at that specific program. Because I think those organizations want to know why you chose them to potentially want to do your fellowship at, as opposed to saying, hey, like I want to do a fellowship at an organization where I can get some executive mentorship. Well, frankly, you can probably get that at any fellowship across the country. So really being specific and intentional about why you're choosing that organization, I think is another way to kind of, I guess, be more intentional, but also show how you might be a little different from some of the other applicants. So thank you for that. Um, this next question is for Amali. Once you submitted your applications and began receiving interview invitations, how did you go about preparing for those interviews?
Yeah, I would say research, and I would hone in on that a lot. I think kind of going back to what you just said, knowing the organization is probably going to be a process of not only researching beforehand, but as you enter the interview, having questions prepped for them because the interview goes both ways. They want to get to know you, you want to get to know them, and know that this organization is going to be the right fit for you. Um, and then aside from that, I did practice behavioral questions with mentors, knew my why. I know that's already been mentioned, but really want to make sure that you're aligned with their mission, that you know the organization again, that your why is innate with that. And then, just be aware that they've already looked at your resume. They know you on paper. They want to get to know you as a person through these interviews. So they're trying to know how you think, how you problem solve, your character, you as a person. So I just hone in on research, and I think behavioral based questions are important.
And a follow-up to that, as you were
Mhm.
going through the interview process, were there any like crazy questions that you weren't expecting that you received that you just kind of had to go with it, go with the flow kind of thing?
Let me think back. I remember I was once asked like what the hardest thing I went through ever was, and I didn't know necessarily if that was like being asked at a professional level, like in an academic setting, in a career setting. So kind of just answered it both ways, but there's going to be sometimes vagueness to some questions that you're like, well, how do I handle this? I think, just having a strong and personal belief in yourself and having good not storylines, but good experiences that you can speak to on both a professional or academic setting. So I think not it wasn't necessarily a crazy question, but it was an ambiguous question that when I was asked, I kind of sat there and thought to myself, well, how do I approach this? So, just cover your basis and I think you'll be okay.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's good insight to have, like you said, those core tenets, I guess, that you keep going back to as you're going through the interview process. I remember I got a crazy question. They asked, "Hey, say one day the CEO came to you and wanted you to get like a zebra to the hospital in a day. Like, how would you do that?" And frankly, that was not something I prepared for, was even ready to talk about. So I fumbled something, but it can get pretty crazy. But thank you for that. Um, this next question I'm opening it for all of you guys, but as we all know, administrative fellowships are incredibly competitive. So what advice would each of you give to students who are hoping to stand out through both the application and the interview process?
I can get us started on that. I know we've talked about this many times, but knowing your why, um, I think doing a little bit of digger of research within yourself and maybe speaking to a mentor of yours of what your why is, where you're headed, and where you see yourself growing in that way, or I guess kind of like fulfilling that self-realization, if you will. I think organizations want to know that you're in it for the right reasons, and so if you can really speak to that and know that, I think you'll be um, competitive in a personal way, because you can be competitive on paper, and I think that most people who are applying for a fellowship fulfill those requirements. So, yeah.
I would definitely add, one of the biggest things is definitely build those connections as early as possible. Reach out to current fellows, ask them questions, set up some time to meet, reach out to past fellows or other people who are within the organization that you may be interested in learning more about their roles, just to start building those connections, have people start remembering your names, attend events such as this, just to be able to be more engaged and be able to listen in and just continue to gather insights. And definitely just continue to iterate that why piece, because that definitely is something that will be very important to help you stand out.
Absolutely. And would add on to that, my approach is more quality over quantity. There's no wrong way of applying to fellowships, but I focused on, I selected 5 health systems that I was passionate about, had my why, had my reasonings, and like tangible things like this is why I want these health systems, can speak to detail onto like why that why supports my own why. And beyond that, recognize that within those 5 systems, I'm going to do my best to connect genuinely with those fellows that I can, right? So not only do you speak to the fellow that's currently going through the program, but then you try to speak to someone that's a VP or above, right? So you're kind of you're casting a wide net and building genuine relationships. I would say that definitely stands out rather than just reaching out on LinkedIn just to reach out and they've seen your name, but you really didn't have a genuine, conversation and something that sticks with them.
If I may, I just want to kind of hone in on something that Ray said. Quality over quantity is super important. I think sometimes you can become, super overwhelmed by how competitive something may be, and you just want to cast a big net, like Ray said. But it's important that you allow yourself the time to really get to know these organizations, build those relationships, and that'll come through and that'll show in the interview process. Whenever you're just like making yourself a broad candidate, you're not going to really know the organization. And you want to, because these are like organizations that you may potentially end up being with for a very long period of time. So you want to make sure that you're being intentional about where you're looking and why you're choosing them.
Yeah, that was all super great, and I would agree with everything that you guys just said. I would also add, I think one of the approaches that I had when I was going through the process, particularly on the interview side, is trying to show different parts of myself outside of just Kobe as a student and Kobe as like a professional. So, for example, if they were to ask a question about, tell us about a time when you had to, work with someone who was difficult to get a task completed. Well, I can talk about, the school projects and things I did at work, but I'll try to think of experiences like, hey, I have a brother and sometimes we don't get along. So maybe one day our parents were asking us to do something and we were arguing about how to get it done. But obviously showing those experiences that are kind of outside of the professional and academic realm, but also showing that the selection committee who I am as a person as well. And so I guess what I'm saying is you have experiences outside of just work in school that also have made you into who you are today, and you learn from those experiences. So don't be afraid to kind of tap into those as well as you're speaking to them both in the application and the interview. For Kaditu and Ray, what does a typical day or what did a typical day as an administrative fellow look like for you? I know that's a super broad question, so feel free to take that however you wish.
Yes, definitely. There is not a typical day. I would say each day can look different, especially depending on which rotation you're in. But I would say most commonly you start out your day answering emails, catching up on those from the day before, things that maybe came in that morning, and then also basing your calendar primarily off of the preceptor that you're rotating with. So a lot of times it's kind of based on what are the meetings that they are attending that day, what type of rounding that they may be doing, or what are some additional things that they'll be attending, and really attending those things. Some days you might have full days of attending retreats. For example, one of the things that we get to attend is the executive retreat that happens over a 2-day span. So there is some time that you get to spend doing that. Some days it might be volunteering at the Houston Food Bank. So honestly, each and every day can vary and it will not be typical, but I will say each day you definitely do get to learn something different and new.
Definitely echo everything just mentioned. Every day is different, especially if you have rotations. So for HCA here in the Gulf Coast, we get to rotate through 4 different hospitals. So depending if it's a small, medium, or large size, that varies with the amount of leadership, COO, VPs that you have that you're working under. So really supplementing to their work what they need, and it allows you to get different exposure as well, right? On a broad level, yeah, there's some volunteer days, a lot of emails, a lot of meetings with docs, a lot of dinners as well that you're included in. There's not a day that's the same, and I think that's what a lot of people love about the hospital operations track and fellowships as well.
Yeah, kind of to follow up, excuse me, sorry about that. Um, was there, oh, sorry, just lost my train of thought. But yeah, I guess going back to your day to day, I guess how much, and I guess Ray, you just kind of spoke to it a little bit, but how much did the structure of your specific fellowship programs play into what that day to day would look like?
I would say the structure depended on the leadership in the hospital I was at. So I would typically sit down with CEO, COO, or VPs and kind of outline, what are your 30, 60, 90-day expectations? Kind of what do you want the resident at your facility to focus on? And that's how I'd structure, the first few weeks, then going on to the last, few months. Typically, like when you're first starting, you want to make sure everyone knows your name, like was mentioned earlier. You're meeting with the leaders, making sure you know how the hospital or the health system works and the different components, because they're all so different. And then as you get more comfortable, you get projects handed to you, or you just jump in where you see opportunity. And by the end, you're plugged into the team. You kind of know what's expected, and then you can actually bring value in, being proactive rather than reactive.
I guess, and I know this is a question that potential applicants think about a lot, but what did work-life balance look like for you guys? What has that looked like for you guys in balancing the responsibilities of your fellowship, but also just trying to live your normal life?
There are definitely times where things will get very busy and you feel like you don't have that work-life balance. But I think as you go through the fellowship, it's very important for you to ensure that you do find that balance. There are definitely times where you need to make sure you meet deadlines. That's why it's very important, especially for me, learning to be as proactive as possible. I think Ray touched on that point and really connecting as early as possible, understanding what are deadlines, what are kind of outcomes and things that preceptor, that person that you're working on that specific project would like to see, and getting started as early as possible to meet that, just so you're not feeling overburdened in the end to get things done. That will be very important because you definitely want to make sure that you do not feel burnt out, because that will definitely impact your experience.
No, absolutely. I think organization has a big part of that. The more you're organized and the more you have a structure, the better you can, balance out your time. Definitely can't say I was perfect my fellowship year. There are some early mornings and long nights, but that's like you're approaching those with a smile as well, because it's like also different, and it's like kind of I view it as a privilege to have that capacity to have an impact at the hospital at that level. So that was my perspective. So didn't mind the early mornings or later nights. But to the point made earlier, the more structure you have and the more you're organized, the better you're able to kind of have that flexibility of, changing things around for your day, as long as you have, your leadership or your preceptors blessing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing those perspectives. For Kudzu, you specifically, what types of projects did you have the opportunity to work on? And were these projects primarily individual initiatives, or were they team-based, or were they a combination of both?
Yeah, so definitely we'll start out with the second part of the question. I feel like with a lot of the different projects I've been able to work with, most of them are really team-based. I feel like you don't really work on it solo. There's definitely is primarily you will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting because it's the opportunity for you to be engaged and be able to get that project management level of exposure. But I feel like at the end of the day, with a lot of these projects, you need to learn from someone. A lot of times asking questions from other people. So definitely per se, you would say that it is an individual project that you will be presenting, but you wouldn't be able to do it without the team who helps provide that support and questions. And answer questions. But ultimately, I would say throughout my different rotations, I have been able to work on a variety of projects. I know during my first rotation at one of the network hospitals, got to work with the director of pharmacy to do kind of a more deep dive financial analysis on a potential meds to beds program that they were looking at establishing. So really seeing what is the financial impact and what are some operational decisions that they should consider, such as staffing, what are some regulations and things along those lines. And then I know when I was in my physician organization rotation, I got to do a project on their comprehensive care centers. So doing a financial analysis to just kind of see in 2025 how are these comprehensive care centers performing. So that really allowed me to get a lot of exposure on physician compensation, understanding how the contracting works, how their rotation schedule works, and things along those lines. I know currently in my HMH rotation, I am working on an anesthesia project, just really looking at ultimately how often are these anesthesiologists here and how efficient are they running, and do we have more than what we need or less, and etc.
Very robust experience. And this might be specific to Houston Methodist, but did you have to seek out these projects, or were they kind of, I guess, waiting for you whenever you got to that part of the rotation?
I would say one of the unique things, Houston Methodist is very familiar with administrative fellows, and people are always ready and eager for you to work on projects. So I would say with throughout all my rotations, they have always had something for me to work on, right, getting started. And there's always definitely the opportunity. I know, for example, my first rotation to really have a sit down and they asked, okay, what are some areas or things that you're interested in working on. And I know for me, with my background being a social work, I wanted to get more exposure into finance. So I asked for projects in that area just to help stretch myself. So they give you projects, you're able to ask to get some exposure in some areas and be able to work on additional projects. But also through the fellowship, it's a great opportunity for you as you're sitting in meetings, ask those questions. If there's something that pops up that you're interested in, follow up with that person and say, hey, I heard you talk about this and this, and I would be interested in learning more. Is there any opportunity for me to be engaged in that in some sort of way? And people are always willing for you to help out. So there's definitely a lot of different opportunities and avenues to go about how these projects are provided to you.
Yeah, I'd second that for sure. Thank you. For Amali, what skills do you think are most important for early career healthcare leaders to begin to develop during their fellowship experience?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that technical skills matter, but the most important skill to me has been communication. I think that you're going to have to adapt your communication style based on who you're speaking to, what department you're speaking to, not only the style of it, but the context of things. So being a good communicator, I think, is super important as healthcare leaders. And then to that soft skill, I'd like to add curiosity and humility. So no one expects you to know everything coming into a fellowship, but I do think that you need to be willing to sit down, listen, and ask thoughtful questions. Be a lifelong learner, be willing to, receive feedback, ask for it. And then I think also resilience is important. So healthcare is changing very quickly. So just being open to change, being adaptable, like I said, going back to being a lifelong learner. Um, those are a couple of skills I think I would propose or I would seek in any healthcare administrator.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate your comment about adaptability and resilience because, like you mentioned, the field of healthcare is so dynamic and things that are happening today aren't necessarily happening tomorrow and vice versa. So it is important to just be ready to adapt at all times. This next question for all of you guys, as you have progressed through your fellowship, did you find yourself naturally drawn to certain areas of healthcare admin, whether it be strategy, operations, finance, ambulatory, or any other area?
I can start us off. I have yet to go through many rotations at all. I have a background in supply chain, so naturally I've been drawn to that, but I do want to explore operations a little bit more. I was actually I'm going to start a strategy rotation, so we'll see how that goes, but I'll leave it off to someone who has gone through more of a fellowship experience than I have.
Yeah, I was able to kind of touch on the strategy, ambulatory, and then hospital operations side within my fellowship, which focuses on hospitals, and really found myself drawn to the operations side specifically, mostly because it's the bread and butter of what patient care is. And when I think about how you can impact someone's life outside of a clinician standpoint, that's what I found was most impactful because everyone's touching the patient, whether it's from the kitchen to EVS to the actual doc, and being able to see that and influence that on ground, in the hospital is something that really drew me to more so the hospital operations.
Yeah, and definitely agree with everything that has been said. I would say the most beautiful thing, especially with this fellowship experience, you come out of grad school thinking you might be interested in certain areas, but you get that certain level of exposure in areas that you never thought about. For example, in grad school, I was interested in strategy, operations, not to say that I'm not interested in that, but starting the fellowship, I got to learn more about like the foundation, for example, and how philanthropic funding works. And that's definitely been something that I've been interested in, wanting to especially learn a little bit more about. So that's the great thing with the fellowship that you get to learn about those areas that you're not familiar with and really see and might find some interest in some of those things.
Yeah, I guess you just kind of spoke to it a little bit, and I'm sure a decent part of it is how your fellowship program is structured. But in your fellowship experiences, did you guys have, I guess, the autonomy or freedom to explore some of those areas that maybe, hey, like, I don't know if I'm interested in this, but I'd like to learn more, say, about, like you said, the foundation or EVS, whatever the case may be. I guess, how much freedom did you have to explore some of the things that you thought were maybe interesting?
I would say from my experience at Houston Methodist, you definitely do because you have those 12 months of core rotations, which are great. And they do have those projects for you get to be engaged in additional things, but then you have about 5 months of elective rotations. So that's definitely the opportunity to get more exposure in areas that you're interested in, such as the foundation, IT, access, marketing, etc. Honestly, any and everything that you can think of, you get that certain level of exposure. Needless to say, though, once you're in your core rotations as well, you can definitely get exposure in certain areas too. You don't have to wait until your elective rotations. I know for me, during my network hospital rotation, I definitely wanted to get more exposure on that clinical side. So I got to spend some time with the operation administrators who really kind of do that hands-on clinical work, making kind of bed movement and things along those lines keep going.
Yeah, thank you for that. For Amali, how would you say, or how important has mentorship been for you throughout kind of your career journey up to this point?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think mentorship has been huge for me. I think it's one of the reasons I am where I am today. During graduate school and during the fellowship application process, meeting with your mentors, having, and this doesn't have to be one person, and it can vary depending on, where you are in life, what your interests are, even and how you align with them at that point in your life. But I had mentors help me with resume review, interview prep, and then just gave me honest feedback about whether they thought that this was the career choice for me. And so, yeah, it can be leadership advice that you're seeking, career strategy, or just expertise in their scope of work. But then that also teaches you to pay it forward and to, become a mentor for others. So just as important as it's been for me to receive it, it's also become a part of something that I like to do for other students. So, um, just giving back, taking from those who have come before you, but then also being willing to pay it forward is important.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think about just as a fellow, just the opportunity you have for mentorship. Obviously, you have kind of your structured preceptor and your executive sponsors and things like that. But I feel like you also build so many, I guess, organic mentorship relationships as you kind of progress through your rotations, and people just really take a vested interest in wanting to see you grow as a professional, which I think is super awesome. So I think you have that to look forward to as you kind of continue on to UTMB. For Ray, did the reality of your fellowship ultimately match your expectations, and why or why not?
Would say almost immediately exceeded my expectations. I would always go back to the, comparison. You learn so much didactically from an MHA program, from the books, from the lectures, but it's totally different being, in a hospital or in a health system and learning from the actual experts who do it every day and who've been doing it for 10 plus years, right? So I would say, in the first 2 months, I learned more than I did, broadly in the past 2 years of an MHA program, just because of the exposure of the time you're putting in and you're just learning. You're kind of like one-on-one, kind of just enhancing or, taking in what people have been doing for years. So I think whether you're spending time, like mentioned earlier, in the OR for weeks at a time, you're just going to pick up, so much tangible information of what it means to run a health system. And I think I immediately was able to, learn that from specific departments from the OR to supply chain. So I would say immediately exceeded my expectations on not only the learning aspect, but then how different health systems bring you in on what you can actually add value in.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree from my perspective as well. I won't get into it, but I would agree. Um, for all of you guys, at this stage of your career, granted, obviously all you guys are at different stages, but how would you each define success?
I would definitely say for me at this stage in my career, I feel, especially at this stage of this fellowship, I feel like I would define success as being that I had many instances where I was very uncomfortable. And I think that's very important, especially a lot of times we get so used to wanting to work on things that we are very familiar with. But it's very important because through these fellowship opportunities, no matter where you're at, you get that certain level of exposure, you get that opportunity to work on projects and get to be engaged in areas that you might not have ever gotten that opportunity to. So really, it's very important for me as especially in this stage to understand like you are being successful if you have been uncomfortable situation, if you have worked on projects that or projects in areas that you are not familiar with, because the greatest growth happens when you're most least uncomfortable. So that's always very important to just kind of keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, to add on to that, as I begin the fellowship process, I think success to me is looking like and will look like taking advantage of every opportunity that I'm given. I realize, like Ray said earlier, it's a privilege to be able to be in the position that we're in. And so looking back and having a variety of projects that one I truly was interested in, I think that I think grew me as a person and as a professional in my career would be good measures of success for me. And yeah, being uncomfortable, learning, it goes back to being willing to you step out of your comfort zone, become familiar with things that you're not comfortable with, that you're not familiar with. I know for me, for example, that's supply chain. You know, I love supply chain. It's easy for me to get involved in those projects and take lead, but maybe, strategy would be a little bit different. So putting myself out there and taking on a major project and strategy would be an indicator of success for me.
Definitely agree with that. I would say two broad strokes of this answer. First one, it's your last year or 2 year, depending on the program, to learn as much as possible. You're a student in the health system, so take advantage of that. Again, we all, I think, agree that this is a privilege to be in a fellowship. And sometimes you'll feel pressure because you're uncomfortable, but that pressure is a privilege. So always remember that. And then the more tangible side on like what success looks like was also told, at the end of your fellowship, whether it's 1 or 2 years, our departments or our hospitals or our leaders fighting to try to retain you in their department, in their hospital. So that's like a tangible way of measuring success as well, if you want to measure that, but also just like focusing on the learning. And when you compare yourself from the beginning to the end, is it night and day from your confidence, your kind of learning, and then just your overall understanding of what it means to run the health system.
Yeah, I would just add, kind of looking back at my own fellowship experience, it's cool to see how the things that I thought would be, I guess, success early in my fellowship, it just kind of became commonplace as I just grew as a fellow, as a professional. So all that to say, your measure of success can change as you go through the fellowship, and that's okay as well. So thank you all for sharing. For Amali, what do you see as the biggest advantages or maybe some of the challenges of completing administrative fellowship?
Yeah, I think the biggest advantage, we'll start with the pros just to be optimistic here, is exposure. I think you get access to one senior leaders that you would typically never have met in an entry level position, but then also you get to sit in on meetings and hear conversations and witness things that otherwise you wouldn't have had exposure to. Then I think you get just a broader understanding of the organization as a whole, as a working system. Although sometimes I know for me, I like to get in the details of things and like truly understand a department. That might be a con, like not having the ability or time to fully dive into what a typical manager's scope of work looks like. But I think, going back to the pro exposure, getting a good understanding of the system overall, getting to touch each department and impact them in some way is, I think, outweighs the con of the limited time frame of the fellowship.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that answer. For Kudjatu, so far up to this point in your fellowship experience, do you feel like your fellowship has prepared you for long-term leadership opportunities in healthcare? And if so, in what ways has your fellowship prepared you?
I would definitely say yes. It definitely prepared me in many different ways. I would say one of those, getting that level of executive leadership presence, especially through that type of component, you get to see a lot of different leadership styles and get to really see what are some leadership styles that really resonate with you, and what are some things that you want to take with you as you continue to grow and develop as a person, especially after in your post fellowship role. That's very important to keep in mind because you may be in a position where you'll be doing that people management component. Also, I would say it definitely prepared me because it allowed me to really be engaged and understand the system, especially as someone who hopes to stay within the organization. You really get to see everything that is happening from sitting in board meetings to understanding, from sitting in strategy meetings to really understanding what is that next step that the organization is taking and what are some thinking and kind of process stuff that they go through. It really helps you understand the thinking and methodology that the organization likes to take, especially as you transition into your new role. That will be very important because those are the type of thoughts and the ideas and types of discussions that hopefully you will be the one leading in the future.
Second that 100%. I kind of thought of it as I was going through my fellowship as like developing my own personal leadership toolkit, if you will. And so as I meet with
Hmm.
these various leaders or go on these various rotations, just taking this tool here and this tool here. And so by the time, a year later, I'm like, wow, I've grown so much in these areas as a leader, thanks to the rooms I've been able to be a part of with these executives. And so it's truly an invaluable experience. And I think it's very, very, very helpful. For Ray, after you completed your fellowship, how did you go about evaluating your next career opportunity?
Yeah, I would say that was something that pretty much from the beginning I was thinking about just through the exposure that was kind of just mentioned as well. Exposure to not just the hospital level, but the division that oversees the 16 hospitals we have in the region. Being able to sit in on board meetings, we're able to see different C-suite leaders. You're drawn to different styles, you're drawn through your conversations, through their experiences that they share. So, through your mentorship or through your preceptor, you're able to have conversations like, what do you think about, next steps with X, Y, or Z person or department, whatever it may be for your fellowship. And I think having those conversations from a very early start, obviously try to read the room as best as possible, right? And have those trusted mentors and preceptors to approach it cordially. You don't want to burn any bridges, but thinking about in your head, similar to how you're thinking about fellowships, what do you value the most? What are the kind of tangible things that you want to gain from your next role or next position? What are you looking for? And as you quantify those things, have those conversations. Hey, I'm thinking about X, Y, Z in this order. These are the reasons, and people will guide you along the way. For myself, I did that pretty much by the first 3 months. I think I was already in my head planning on I wanted to position myself for these two hospitals, and by the end of it, I had the opportunity to select between the two opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great experience. Thank you for that. For Kudjitu, whenever you think about, I guess, personal branding as an administrative fellow, um, what advice would you give to someone looking to intentionally build, I guess, their professional reputation?
I would definitely say when kind of building your own personal brand is very important to continue to be yourself. Especially when you're going through this fellowship, it's very important to be yourself because you you will be successful at that organization when you're yourself because they will accept you for who you are, and that is kind of you building your own personal identity because nobody else can build that for you. No one else can tell you what is most best fit for you, and you are the only person who can make that happen. So that is definitely something important, and especially when we speak on that professional side of things, I would say, yes, you can build that for yourself, but it's also very important to ask those questions as well to other people who have kind of went through this same experience. Because a lot of times, especially as you're kind of an early careerist or kind of understanding um, healthcare a little bit more, starting out a fellowship or whatever kind of level you're in your career, it's definitely important to gauge and understand some insights from other people who have went through those experiences, understand how do they build their personal identity, what are kind of those struggles that they possibly went through that you might be going through, or that you might go through in the future, that will really help you kind of shape your own kind of personal identity.
Sure. I guess following up with that, um, how would you say that the work you produce as a fellow, whether it be the projects you're working on or the initiatives you're part of, how do you think that also builds or affects your professional reputation?
I would definitely say with a lot of these projects, helps build your professional reputation because a lot of these executives are seeing your projects. You're literally presenting to a lot of these people. A lot of these projects are helping with supporting decision making. I know recently, one of the clinics lease is coming up to end pretty soon, and really got to do a deep dive to see what are some next step recommendations, what is the productivity of the physicians who are currently there, and really taking that on and presenting to the executive team because that helps them ultimately make the decision of, do we want to continue this lease at this location? Do we want to transition, or what are some next steps that we want to do? So at the end of the day, through those experiences, I would say it gives you that certain level of exposure as well, especially through my experience. And I would also say it kind of helped me build my personal identity just through being able to go through all of those hard situations, difficult projects and things, just to really understand, okay, we're moving on to the next project. What are some things that I can take on, learning from what I learned from this previous projects to take on?
Yeah, yeah, that's super great. Thank you for sharing that insight. For Ray, when you think about the future of healthcare, what do you think excites you most about the next generation of healthcare leadership?
It's a great question. I would say that never, it never stops changing, whether it's technology, and I think everyone would say AI, right? But whether it's adjusting to that or whether it's adjusting to like most recent policy, because, at the end of the day, our job, or at the hospital level, we are people taking care of people, and we're taking care of patients. So at the end of the day, that's our focus. And when we think about the ways we can do that, as technology grows, as policy adjusts, we have to adjust as well. So it's not going to be the same this year versus next year. And we're going to have to readjust our resources, look at different ways of, even whether it's looking at the payer side or whether it's looking at the procedure side. There's so much that can be, changed. And then with that, we have to change. So I think that's what excites me the most, that we never stop learning. And then by the end of that, we can just grow and grow to be able to take care of our patients the best.
Yeah, and I think it's also great that we're the ones who are going to be kind of tackling and facing those challenges, right? And so it's an exciting time ahead for all of us future healthcare leaders. So this is the last question before we transition to the Q&A. But for each of you guys, if you could leave everyone here with one piece of advice or one key takeaway as they kind of begin their own administrative fellowship journeys, what would that piece of advice be?
I would definitely say we already reiterated, but really knowing your why. So having that kind of strong why personally, why do you want to be in healthcare administration? Why do you want an administrative fellowship? And also kind of why do you want to be at that specific organization will be very important. It will make things very easy, especially if that's something that's very strong. When writing your personal statement, when going through interviews and kind of thinking of the different questions that these individuals will ask you. And also, I will say that this is definitely a journey. It will be rocky and things might not work out how you want at the end of the day, but everything works out that is meant for you. And everything works out in its own timing. I think one of the biggest things that someone shared with me is that life is not a race, but it will go on your own journey. So really just being patient with yourself, giving yourself grace. And if things don't work out as planned as you would like, definitely still know that there are still many different opportunities still out there, and just understand, okay, what are some things that I can improve on to for the next interview or for the next application that I'll be submitting and things along those lines. And also take your time, read through applications, have someone else read through applications as much as they can as well.
Yeah, well, I feel like you covered all the ground there was to cover, but I'll just hone in on one piece. Don't just apply to collective fellowship applications. Genuinely be able to explain why you want to be at that organization. I think that comes across in interviews, so I think it's important that you're authentic. Um, and I think that'll show up in conversations, that you having done your research, you being able to connect with them seeing potential in you to grow with their organization. It'll be like the stars align. So yeah, and then also don't sell yourself short, not saying to be egotistical here, but go into these interviews well prepared and confident in yourself, know what you have to offer and be able to speak to that. So I think all of those things will set you up for success. I'll leave it to you, Ray.
Yeah, I would say to add on to that, really important to have your own tangibles on why you want each health system. And I would say beyond that, have the fellowships you're applying to ranked for yourself, right? So know that, if you were offered the 5 that you are offered, you would take the number 1 spot over number 2 for X, Y, or Z reason. Because if all goes well, you're going to be offered a final round interview that's going to conflict with your final round interview the next Monday, and you have 24 hours to decide. Are you going to take the risk? Or are you going to take that position? And that happened to myself and many of my peers as well. So it's really important to have your own ranking of understanding why you want a certain health system and specific tangibles that are quantifiable, kind of a yes or no, like whether it's geographics, whether it's a 1 or 2 year fellowship, just whatever makes the most sense and is most important to you, rank that and have that as a quantifiable way to judge your decision making going forward, because it's going to be hard, but it's a good problem to have, and options are a good problem to have. So I would say that's the largest piece of advice I would give.
Yeah, I would add, but every time I thought of something, one of the panelists said it, so I second what everyone said. So thank you for that great answer. Well, I know I've learned a great deal simply by listening to each of the experiences of our panelists, and I hope everyone joining this call this evening has well. At this point, we'd love to open the floor for questions for the audience. So if you have a question for one of our panelists or all of them, please feel free to submit your question in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask the question. So this time is now for you guys.
Hi there. One question I have for anybody that has a good answer or thinks they know why is What do you think personally was a special thing that made you chosen in your respective fellowship over everyone else during the interview process? What do you think that made you shine or stand out or sure that you were the right fit that they wanted?
I can start and then I'll let anyone else answer. I think one thing I was very intentional about doing, excuse me, as I was going through my application process was showing the organizations why I was also aligned with their mission and vision and values. At the end of the day, those mission, vision, and values are what that health system deem are important to them at their core. And so my thinking was if I can show that I'm aligned in what they think is important, then that kind of shows alignment and a fit from an opportunity perspective. And so I was very intentional. And that kind of goes back to my previous comment about doing your due diligence and research of the organizations you want to apply to. I was very selective in where I wanted to apply, and I always applied to places where I felt that I could fully align with those kind of mission and vision and values. So then it was easy to speak to those things in the application process, in their interview, and so on and so forth. So I think that's something I tried to do that maybe it set me apart, maybe it didn't, but I think my goal there was to try to show alignment between myself and the organizations in that way.
Yeah, I
Thank
can add
you.
on to that.
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Ray. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty similar to what Kobe said. I was just going to say that typically, whenever you look at these values of the organization, kind of take a look at yourself and what your values are. I know, I have to bring this up as an Aggie. And values are a big thing for us, and like you find that many of those values align with other organizations, and it's pretty easy. It's something that like we're taught to like really hone in on and grow in ourselves and develop. And so, just having those similarities, that common ground to be able to tell a story and have those values come across, whether you verbally say it out loud or you show those values through your, whatever it was, like problem solving, your moral code or whatever, etc. It'll make you stand out as a person and show your character. But I'll give it over to you, Ray. I know you had something to add, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, just to add on to that, I would say the more specific you can be, the better. I think for every health system I interviewed for, I had something tangible, whether it was me pulling up the community health needs assessment for a specific city and looking at how the health system impacted that or had a role in, improving outcomes. I was able to speak to specific programs that I was interested in that, everyone's going to memorize the mission, vision, and value and can repeat that in an interview. But how many people, looked under the hood and could speak to tangibles of what the system was doing actively and why you were interested in that. So you're not only tying in, you guys are already doing this, I have an interest in this, and I'm bridging it by, bringing in my own values, right? So I think it's all how you kind of narrate that story, but the more specific you can be, I think the better, odds you get against your other candidates.
Yeah, that's great. We have a few questions in the chat. So, one question, how big are the fellowship classes? I will say that varies by organization, so I can speak to Memorial Hermann and then maybe everyone else can answer for the organization. But specifically for Memorial Hermann, we accept 2 fellows per cohort.
UTMB has historically accepted one, and I think we're looking to continue that.
HCA has 190 hospitals, but they only take around 20 to 30 residents throughout the whole US, and that varies per state or per region.
And Houston Methodist typically takes 2 to 3 fellows per cohort cycle.
So, and then another question I see in the chat, what area have y'all experienced the most growth in, whether technical or soft skills?
I would definitely say I gained a lot more experience and exposure in the finance piece. I definitely touched on that a little bit earlier, but just because that's something that's very important, even if it's something that you may not be interested in being in like a finance department post fellowship, it definitely throughout the projects and experiences and meetings I've been able to sit in really allowed me to get that finance exposure that I was looking for.
I think I'm pretty early, like I said, I'm pretty early on sorry, I just read the last question. How do you find a mentor? I'll touch on the skills section first, and then I'll answer the following. But I would say communication. I think every leader that I've worked with has a different preference in their style of communication. Some prefer to hop on a call, some just like a Teams chat, an email. But through it all, like knowing what the most efficient and preferred method of communication amongst different groups of people and leaders is, and then, having your own way of keeping that organized and keeping yourself accountable for conversations that were had, following up, and so forth. So, yeah, communication has been big. I don't know if anyone else had anything to add to that question before we move on.
Yeah, I think broadly, the more reps you get in, the better you're going to be with just the business acumen of the system as a whole, and the more comfortable you're going to be to speaking to the actual content. I think beyond that, the more exposure you get to leadership, the boardrooms, you find leadership styles that you resonate more with. You see things that you want to pick up and add to your toolbox, and you see things that you would approach differently. So I think those are equal in value, knowing what you want to add on and learn, and also what you think you can stray away from.
Definitely. And to the question about finding a mentor, I think it again also might vary kind of by organization. I would say for Memorial Herman, we have like a set preceptor who we meet with on a regular cadence. And so she is always checking in on us, asking us how things are going, supporting us in ways we need. But also, I think I also mentioned a little earlier, you kind of go throughout the fellowship and go through different rotations, you meet people who just kind of naturally you kind of form that mentorship experience with. And so whether that be going out for coffee and catching up a recorder, whatever the case may be. I remember, I think my second week of the fellowship, I was working on a project, and one of the leaders I was working with emailed me and said, "Hey, like I know you're new to the organization. I'd love to kind of show you how to go about making an executive presentation. I think this will be helpful for you as you kind of go throughout your fellowship." And so that was something she did on her own accord, and I've been in contact with her ever since, kind of in that kind of mentorship role. So I think it's also one of those things where if there's someone you connect with, you can frankly just ask them like, "Hey, like I really think I would learn a lot from you, and I like the way you lead, or I like the way you do X, Y, Z. And so would you be open to mentoring me?" And I think more often than not, leaders are very open to kind of supporting students and fellows in that way. So I think those are some various ways in which you can kind of get mentorship. I see a few hands raised, so feel free to unmute and ask your question. I think Inessa, I saw your hand first.
Yes, hello. Thank you all for the panel. It's been super informative. My name is Yanessa, and I'm a current graduate student. So I was just wondering, looking back, what made an administrative fellowship the right choice for you instead of, I guess, accepting a permanent position or looking for a permanent role after graduation?
I think for me, I was definitely still in the phase of needing to figure it out. I definitely had a lot of ideas and thoughts of areas, departments I was interested in, but just felt like I was kind of missing that hands-on level of exposure and experience, especially on that healthcare administration side of things. So definitely with the fellowship, I believed it would have been a great opportunity, and it is a great opportunity just to be able to get that hands-on exposure, be able to see what that day-to-day life looks like, especially for people in those various roles, and really get to see firsthand what it may look like for me and see if it aligns with me and what my goals are. So I would definitely say without the fellowship, I would not have been able to have that opportunity to do that if I had went just to get a full-time position right after graduate school.
And on that similar note, I'd only had work experience with supply chain, and then I wanted to take some of the stuff I was taught in the classroom and apply it in a real world context. So, you have your strategy, marketing, HR classes, etc., but you don't really know what that looks like until you're applying and putting things into practice. So I think a fellowship allows for that opportunity, and I didn't want to sell myself short or decide too early in my career that that's what I wanted supply chain is what I wanted to stick with. So giving myself the opportunity to explore a fellowship would allow me the exposure to many different departments and kind of see where I best fit.
Absolutely. And just to add on to that, recognizing some of us come straight from undergrad to our MHA program, and taking it as an extra step or extra year of, education, but like hands-on is how I approached it, but I agree with everything that was said before.
Yeah, I'll answer, and I think I'll try to answer in a way that also answers one of the questions in the chat asking about are we all coming from non-medical fields? So I think for myself, I had a medical school background, so I was in medical school for a few years before I decided to transition to the healthcare admin side. So I knew um, a fellowship would give me the opportunity to learn more about what the field of healthcare administration has to offer in terms of what it all entails. And so I think for me, it was important to be able to have that opportunity to learn from various leaders and also have the option to kind of learn from operations, strategy, finance, marketing, operations, so on and so forth. And so I think for me, it was just another opportunity to learn more and kind of get my bearings about myself in the world of healthcare administration. Um, I think Natalie, your hand is raised as well, so feel free to ask your question.
Hello, yes. I'm also a current graduate student in an MHA program as well. And so I was just wanting to kind of go back to the mentorship question. I know you talked about mentorship during the fellowship process and while you were already with an organization, but while you were still a student, did you find mentorships with your professors or other staff within your university or whatever other program you were doing to be very beneficial for referring you to programs or helping you through the application process, or did you do it was it very individualistic, or how was that sort of for you all?
I would definitely say for me at Ohio State, the mentorship piece while I was still in graduate school was definitely something of what I would make it. There was definitely the opportunity to be connected with alumni for students who were interested. They had like a summer mentorship opportunity while we were in our summer internship, which was great. But I would say definitely taking advantage and leveraging these professional development organizations such as ACHE. I know for me, NAHSE, the Central Ohio chapter was one that had a mentorship program that I stayed connected with during graduate school. So that definitely helped me through that process.
I know for me, my faculty advisor was a big mentor of mine, so I leaned on him a lot when deciding what fellowships I wanted to apply to and just advice in general about where I wanted to go in my career. But then also with my part-time jobs, I looked for, and even summer practicum, I found mentors at those organizations and kept up with them throughout the rest of my graduate degree journey. So doesn't just have to be, a professor. It can also be a professional in the industry if you're able to get a hold of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say my program director came from healthcare, like microeconomics, but he gave me like a very different perspective than, a faculty member that had 20 years of CEO experience from different health systems. And when you're making tough decisions on, you have the offer, you have 24 hours, but you want this other health system more on a Monday that you're interviewing for, they're going to give you two different perspectives and you're going to make the decision on your own. I would say the more people you can trust and have in your corner to, to talk through things, the better.
For sure. Yeah, I'd also agree a lot. I leaned a lot on kind of my program director and my faculty members, but also um, if you're able to do an internship, I think the leadership that you gain or the kind of your preceptor that you're working with is also another great mentor, especially as someone who's in the field of healthcare administration as well. And kind of like you mentioned, Natalie, like these are great people who know you personally and as a student and professionally, and who can speak to you well as an applicant and can probably write you a great letter of recommendation. So I think that's a great thing you can do from those relationships as well. Um, Brandon had a question in the chat. What is one thing that you did not expect going into your fellowship that is obvious to you now?
I would definitely say the level of exposure that you get, especially with these le executive leadership teams. I think we all kind of iterated this a little bit, but ultimately being able to sit in board meetings, being able to sit in boom weeklies with the president and CEO every single week and things along those lines. I feel like that definitely was something that I did not expect at all. But it definitely has been beneficial because you get to be able to interact with a lot of these executives and be able to connect with them, have maybe that personal connection or be able to follow up with them in regards to any type of questions that you may have. But definitely didn't expect that level of exposure and definitely very thankful for that.
Well, I see MK, you have your hand raised, so feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much for your questions and answers. I've really appreciated getting to hear from y'all. My question is, so you have all these characteristics and traits that you're looking for in an administrative fellow, and I was wondering, what's the main characteristic, or what's one characteristic or trait that you see yourself using daily? Let me explain. So I work as an endodontic assistant right now. If you're unfamiliar with endodontics, I assist in root canals. And so something that I see myself having to do daily is being very empathetic with these patients, and really caring for them, because they're scared. And I was wondering if there's something similar that you see yourself doing every single day as an administrative fellow.
I think something that I don't know where I coined this term exactly from, but it's ambitious, being a ambitious leader, so humble and ambitious. I think those are two characteristics that'll take you a long way. Always knowing that you can do more and that you're willing to do more, but then also remaining humble. Like I said, we're in a very privileged position as fellows to be able to sit in the rooms and hear the conversations that we do. So, remaining humble, knowing that we don't know anything, and then keeping that ambition within us to keep growing as leaders. So, yeah.
That's a really cool word. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know one phrase that our preceptor uses a lot is just someone who has the quote unquote fire in the belly, or just this passion for healthcare leadership, and just kind of like I'm just highlighting this desire to learn and grow. And so I think one thing that I didn't, I guess, realize as a fellow that became evident is like there's a lot of I guess taking a lot of initiative. I feel like your experience as a fellow is kind of what you make of it. And so they always tell us at Memorial Hermann we have the keys to the kingdom. And so frankly, whatever we want to pursue, they give us the freedom to do that. So taking the initiative to reach out to individuals, to schedule those one-on-ones, to get involved in projects, to speak up in meetings. These are all things that kind of show that you have that fire in the belly and the passion, the desire to learn and grow, and ultimately contribute to the organization as well. So I think that's something that's super important for our preceptor and our program.
Thank you so much. That's a fire in the belly. I'll be sure to cultivate that.
Sure. Another question I see in the chat. Have you had fellows in the past who came from healthcare roles like nursing or other clinical positions? I'll say that probably varies by organization, but I can speak from Memorial Hermann. Definitely, some individuals in the past who have come from those more clinical facing backgrounds and have decided to kind of transition to the healthcare leadership side. So for Memorial Hermann, definitely yes.
I'll speak for UTMB. I know the previous 4 fellows that came before me haven't had clinical backgrounds, but I don't think they'd be opposed to it. I think that with a clinical background, you bring a really unique, advantageous perspective to the table. So I'm sure any organization would be open to it.
Same thing with HCA, different ages, different backgrounds, clinical, non-clinical. Really, really just depends on the health system and the requirement on the MHA before you graduate, or the MHA before you start the fellowship, or if it's a requirement to graduate. I think that varies the most.
Yeah, definitely for Houston Methodist, it can vary year over year. I know the previous cohort right before me, one of the fellows had some experience as an emergency department nurse, so it definitely can vary.
Looks like Brandon has a question. If you could go back in your career and learn one area to help you currently, what would you choose?
That's a great question, Brandon. I think I would brush up or dive deeper into my finance skills. I think it touches everything, whether that be, strategy, operations. Almost every project that you work on will have a financial portion to it. So I think just honing in on, for me personally, it'd be strengthening my finance skills.
I would say for myself, maybe like something more on the data analytics side. I think our organization is very data driven and it kind of informs a lot of decisions we make. So just being able to be comfortable with understanding data, what is it telling us, and how we're going to use this information to inform our future decisions. So that's something that I experienced a lot in my fellowship, and I think it would have been helpful if I had a little more background in that, but definitely something that I've grown in and learned from. So for myself, I'd say kind of that data analytics side of things. Awesome. Are there any more questions? Great. Well, as we conclude tonight's session, I'd like to sincerely thank each of our panelists for sharing their time and experiences and thoughtful insights. I would say administrative fellowships are truly one of the most unique opportunities available to early career healthcare leaders, and I really hope that our conversation this evening helped make that journey feel a little less intimidating, a little more exciting as you guys begin to think about what those next steps might look like for you. And so, to everyone who joined us, thank you so much for spending part of your night with us. We sincerely appreciate all your questions, your interest in healthcare leadership. We wish you all the best as you move forward in your academic and professional journey. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. You'll have a wonderful evening as well.
Thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you.